All right, well, our next speaker, which we're glad to have here, we've been inviting him for a couple of years to come and join us, and he finally was able to this year, and it's Ronnie Duggar, and I titled the talk, "A Texas Observer Remembers Dallas in 1963." Ronnie Duggar is an investigative journalist who founded the Texas Observer and was the editor and publisher of that for 40 years. He authored numerous biographies, including Dark Star, Hiroshima Reconsidered, The Politician, The Life and Times of LBJ, and On Reagan, a police policy biography of Ronald Reagan. He also wrote Our Invaded Universities, a play, and is a working poet. His articles have appeared in The New Yorker, The Nation, Progressive, Atlantic, Harper's, and New York Times Magazine. He's the founder of the Alliance for Democracy, an anti-big corporation nonprofit group, and he covered the assassination in Dallas, riding in the press bus when JFK was murdered in Dealey Plaza. For the next 2 months, he filed reports on the incident with the Texas Observer and the Washington Post, and he's been attentive to the subject for the past 47 years. So this is Ronnie Duggar.
Can I open that? Andy, I might need it. Yeah. Well, my talk's going to be the least informative, I'm sure, of this weekend. I'm about a fourth grader compared to you folks, as I'll explain in a minute. In reasonable expectation, there's no chance I'm going to catch up with you all on this subject. Perhaps I'm here as a penitent and an admirer. Sorry for not having been here before, but my field has been politics. And although it's changing now, I've been out for 5 years. My wife's been ill, and she died last month, so I'm back in now. But I'm not specialized as you all are, and subspecialized as you are. So I come with a couple of recollections from Dallas 47 years ago, and the few grades of learning I've been through on this subject, and a suggestion at the end that might contribute to your ruminations, speculations, eventually intentions concerning 3 to 4 years from now, the 50th anniversary of this event. I want to tell you why I'm here as an admirer. I've been an admirer of John Judge for decades, and I'm a follower of his. He introduced the idea, the assassination of John Kennedy, especially, but not only John Kennedy, the other two also, it became a kind of a swamp. A research swamp, a data swamp, a speculation swamp, a guesswork swamp, neurosis swamp, a psychosis swamp. It's crazy. And there's a huge literature, as you know, if you can call much of it literature or research. And John works on the idea of the serious researchers. And he gathers here his aggregation of the serious researchers. And I have a special gift for banalities, so I figured out this morning what's characteristic of you serious researchers: assiduousness and persistence, controlling attention to the quality of the evidence, and honor and courage, defying the media-promoted, but not necessarily media-generated, contempt for conspiracy theorists. It's particularly that last honor and courage that I admire you for. The political context in Texas, quickly, I would remind you of in the Kennedy assassination. Alan Shivers was the so-called Democrat who was going to lead the people inclined into the Eisenhower camp. Senator Ralph Yarborough was the leader of the populist liberals, the U.S. senator, whom we were following as far as we could go. Lyndon Johnson had been through at least 5 different opportunistic phases of simulated policy positions. He started out as a New Dealer Southern racist. He then became an anti-union Truman man. After that, he was a Southern racist Eisenhower man, and then a mildly progressive Southern liberal about race, running for president, then the vice president. And in my opinion, if you put Vietnam and foreign policy and war policy aside, he then became a really extraordinarily successful and progressive civil rights and domestic policy leader. If you think whom you can compare him to in terms of effectiveness, you have to go back to Roosevelt. Well, in that context, Johnson was the enemy of the liberals and progressives, and Yarborough was is the word avatar? I'm still not sure what that word means. Now, my first grade in this subject, my first grade education was when Kennedy came down to Texas. I was assigned by the Washington Post to help cover it with, I think it was Eddie Fogarty. I'm not quite sure of Eddie's last name. I haven't done any recollection except in the last day or two about this. And he and I were covering the assassination for the Washington Post, that is, covering Kennedy's visit, and I was covering, of course, for the Observer. And we were in the second press bus, and I have one extremely vivid memory when Jackie and the president got off the airplane, and they were just shining. They were shining in the morning sunlight, and I was about in the second row behind, I believe, yellow rope where the people gathered at the airport were, and they came directly toward me, and they were shaking hands, and it was a beautiful moment. He spoke that night, Friday, in Fort Worth, and the next day, in the press bus coming around the corner there, I heard a popping, and then the bus came to a complete stop. And suddenly it accelerated. I remember seeing a motorcyclist going up the grassy knoll hill, sort of like a horse. It seemed like that his front wheels were leaving the incline upward. As we zipped through Dealey Plaza, I saw a figure dash in front of our bus. And I always thought later, after I became acquainted with the existence of Jack Ruby and his role, that it was he, but it was only an impression. I could never report it anywhere because it was so indistinct. So we raced along Parkland, Stemmons Expressway, and got to Parkland. The first thing I saw was Ralph Yarborough. It was very dear to me personally and to all of us. Tears running down his face. There at the entrance to the emergency room. So he was dead. He wasn't dead yet, hadn't been announced yet, but we waited around for the announcement, and I of course, was on the phone with the Washington Post in awful grief. They kept me on the phone for 3 hours. I should have been reporting all that time. So I wound up in the records building that night. I remember Oswald being led along the hallway, clearly saying, "I'm a patsy. I'm just a patsy." Bill Alexander was a good friend of mine and a terrific source on other stories. He was the assistant district attorney to Henry Wade. And along about 9 or 10 o'clock, he came up to me with his with Oswald's address book. Said, "Look here," and I think he indicated, I wrote it down at the time and reported it in the Post the next morning, I think it was the address of the Soviet embassy. Said he's a communist, that is Oswald. And then, of course, there was the press conference where Ruby was. I didn't see Ruby there, but it was tumultuous and meaningless. Oh, next day, we understood that Oswald was in the, usually, I think, in the office of Sheriff Fritz being questioned. And from later data, later testimony and witnesses speaking, we know that it was FBI agents and police and everybody in and out questioning Oswald all day. I remember maybe 15 years later, I called Captain Fritz and said, "Where are the notes or the records of the recordings?" And he confirmed there weren't any. Such anomalies persist. So my second grade in this subject was the next 2 months. And I stayed, I think, at the Adolphus, of course at the expense of, not the Texas Observer, would have busted us, but Adolphus. But the Washington Post. I remember Mark Lane went over to Romania. He was making all kinds of extraordinary statements about American complicity in the assassination and, I don't know, CIA, FBI, anybody in range that Lane could blame, he'd blame. He became, with all due respect to your opinions, no doubt better informed than mine, the exemplar of the unserious researcher. And he said something in Bulgaria or Romania, which I read in the paper, and then he was back here. So I asked him to come up to the room where I was in the Adolphus, and I asked him where he got that information. Please tell me his source. And he looked at me like I was a madman. He just looked at me and never said a word. I'm following notes because I just figured out what I could say without boring you and taking too much time today. 47 years later, the case is still not solved, right? 80%, 85% of the American people don't believe the government. They don't believe the Warren Commission. Well, when you consider that John Kennedy, in my opinion, in the retrospect, which was much different from my opinion in the prospect and reality of his presidency, in league with Nikita Khrushchev, saved the human race from nuclear war and possibly extinction. He was one of our great presidents. I held it against him that he was so mild and kind of tucked under in domestic policy. That was the flaw in my perception of him as president. But he and Khrushchev prevented nuclear war. The Joint Chiefs was absolutely unanimous. They wanted to go in and invade, and they wanted to bomb. Meanwhile, Castro was telling Khrushchev, bomb the United States with your nuclear weapons. We didn't even know they were, what do you call them, loaded, or they were armed. They were ready to kill 140 million Americans at least, after which what would have happened? Well, who knows, but it was Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Khrushchev who turned back. Khrushchev said to his fellow ossified executives of the dictatorship there, we had to accept defeat to save the human race. They knew what it was about. We know what it was. I knew at the time. I had a 1948 Chevrolet, and I loaded it with canned goods and water, and we were headed out for an apex point near Del Rio, and then we were going down to Guatemala, where we were going to meet some friends on the theory that the fallout would not hit the National Hotel area in Guatemala, whatever the capital of Guatemala is. No, we all understood we were dealing with the end of the human race, or at least the end of millions of us. So how can it not be known 47 years later? Well, I kept an eye on it, but of course my field had been, and rather naively had been, American politics, a subject that has diminished in interest proportional to the increase of the totality of its corruption. I think the Congress is a whorehouse. So that was my third grade. Now I'm here today because it suddenly occurred to me that although I had always been willing to come and expatiate to little point, although perhaps some amusement at this meeting, you only been at this 16 years, and before that, Now, the serious researchers have been at this for 47 years, and cumulatively, maybe I could get through the 4th grade here. And I have. And I'm very impressed with your meeting. I continue to be deeply grateful to John and all of you who support him and come here guided by his light, I think in a way, if I don't overspeak or over-dramatize your role, John, I just really think you got a leader here. Now, what I want to do at this point is to intrude on your subject. God knows I haven't done anything to earn the right to an opinion about it, but I know you're starting to plan about the 50th anniversary of John Kennedy's assassination. Well, that'll be a whole year, right? And it starts 3 years from now. So, in addition to all else you plan, isn't there something that could be done about the rights of the American people and history to know what happened to John Kennedy? Wonderful book written by a friend of mine, Jim Douglas, about what he was killed for. Wonderful book. It's called The Unspeakable, I think, or something of that kind. And but it's not about who did it. And maybe, well, here's the idea that was about 2 hours old. A hearing conducted not by the government, perhaps under the auspices of some great university, by a group of honorable and respected citizens, including judges, historians, certainly, in my opinion, John Judge and others among the group of serious researchers, on behalf of history and the American people, about who killed Kennedy or what killed him. And then 5 years thence, the same kind of hearing by the same kind of aggregated group, not of the government, but of citizens whom at that time could represent the people of the United States, about the murders of Robert and Martin Luther King. Eventuating, probably, in trials for history. Again, not by the government, not mock ones, which issue historical verdicts, arrived at on behalf of the American people. Thank you. Sure. You go ahead and recognize folks.
All right.
Please.
Yeah, Chris.
Well, you had one liberal rival in the newspaper business during your time with the Observer, and his name was Ben Jones, editor of the Midlothian Mirror.
Yeah.
Could you reflect for a few moments on your relationship with him, how well you knew him, what you thought of his views, and anything that might be of interest to someone who's going to be writing a book about him?
Well, Penn was a good man, and we were dear friends. He would come down to Austin. I would stop at Midlothian. And, I don't think I ever spent the night with him, but I might have, him and his wife. And he believed a lot of people were being murdered in the sequel to the assassination. But being only a fifth grader now, I think I'll leave the evaluation of Penn's convictions and specific accusations
Did you spend a lot of time
to you all.
Did you
What?
spend-
Together?
Yeah, we were friends. We were not what you call running pals. We didn't drink whiskey together, or to the extent that some of you did at that time, chase girls. No, we weren't. We didn't go fishing together, that sort of thing. But we were close because we were both aggrieved. Go ahead.
Ronnie,
Yeah.
going back to the assassination in the days and weeks after 11/22/63, was there a lot of rumor, gossip about the involvement of maybe three individuals? H.L. Hunt, the oil man, Clinton Murchison Sr., the oil man, both of them big supporters of Lyndon Johnson, and of course Lyndon Johnson. So could you comment on that? What people
I'm
were...
sorry, somebody's talking. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Could you comment on what people were saying, not necessarily in the newspaper, but that you were hearing in private conversations about H.L. Hunt's involvement, Clinton Bergson Sr. and Lyndon Johnson?
Well, the problem with that is that everybody in the United States was speculating about who had done it. In other words, in all due respect for the content of your question, whatever people thought about it was worthless. The question is not what people thought about it, what they suspected, but what they knew, and they didn't know anything, and we still don't. We got a lot of data, but correlating it, and I tell you, Bill Alexander had a term that he was. I won't tell you about the scenes when he was telling me stuff going on in cases I was trying. I mean, I was trying to penetrate for the press. But he said one day, I was following along with him. I remember the gun on his hip at Records Building when I asked him something about, I believe whether he was in danger from people he'd put in prison. And he knew he was. And he said, but what you're looking for when you're investigating a case, you're looking for the greasy thumbprint. The greasy thumbprint. That's what we're still looking for concerning the murder of those three. And yeah, we got lots of trails. Let me tell you, one of my experiences when I was still in the second grade on this subject, that 2 months when I remember, Sylvie, Odio, and all of those rabbit trails. It was like being in a latticework of rabbit trails. And it did seem to me that if somebody had planned the assassination, I certainly never believed Oswald did it alone. That was simply incredible from the first, on the superficial appearances of things. It was like somebody had laid that rabbit trail. Like somebody had figured out, somebody pretty smart. Well, what we have to do is, it's going to be a sensational event. We're going to have to lead people off in every direction, except the one I assume people making that plan would be correct. Very appalling. So I'm not answering your question because I could say yes. There were people who thought the CIA did it. The people who thought Hoover or the FBI was behind it. There were at least 5 theories, and I thought it a while about writing what would have been, I'm afraid, a rather superficial and much mistaken book called 5 Theories. Because there was a plausible ground, say, for each of 5 or up to 8 or 10 theories, but they were mutually exclusive, except as maybe 2 or 3 of these groups might have collaborated through some of their people. So I'm not trying to not answer your question. I'm only say, yes, people were highly suspicious in many directions, including toward those whom you mentioned. But so what? We're still here.
Ronnie, I have a question. I
Yeah.
brought a still photograph. Would you hold up this still photograph? Is this your press bus in this photograph?
Well, it was the second press bus, so you can judge.
I know, but I want you to see. Did you stop in the kill zone area? Is that where your
No,
bus stopped?
no, we didn't. We stopped. I don't think I think we just turned into the plaza. That turn off Elm, isn't it? And it came to a dead stop because, of course, the whole damn. And Ralph told me later the whole damn thing came to a complete stop, which had very profoundly disturbed him. But that's what happened. No, and then we accelerated like a bat out of hell.
All right, and you accelerated to where?
To Parkland.
All right, and there was a bus in front of you?
What?
There was a bus in front of you?
Yeah, we were in the second press bus. I think Ed was there with me.
All right. Can you identify that bus?
No, I can't see it from here, and besides, I didn't look at it. Why do you look at a bus when you get in it?
I'm just curious. I'm just curious if it looks like the
I don't
first
know.
one.
But if it's the second one, it's the one we were in. And there were only 2 buses in the cavalcade, as I
yes.
remember. Why do you ask?
I'm studying that photograph.
Okay. I'd like to see it up close after
Yes.
we finish here. Maybe whenever we adjourn. Don't let him carry it off. I want to look at it too. Okay. Sorry not to help. Go ahead, John.
Anyone else?
You know Bill Moyers?
Yeah. You want to ask anything else?
Were you close?
We are close.
You are
We were
close.
and we are. Very.
Jack Valenti?
Yeah, I knew Jack, of course, and Mary Margaret Wiley, who became his wife, was the managing editor of the Brackenridge Times at Brackenridge High School in San Antonio when I was the editor. And as I wrote in the Observer about a year or two ago, when Johnson had me out to the ranch in 1956, I got involved in an argument with him at dinner when he wouldn't let me leave about whether the role of a journalist should be to pick out the candidate he or she prefers mostly among the candidates for president and make a kind of a secret deal to promote that candidate. I told him I thought that was problematical for a practicing journalist and got away from there as fast as I could. And Mary Margaret was there. She and Bird were there at dinner, and neither ever said a word. Yeah, Mary Margaret, a good friend of mine. And Jack and I got along okay, but of course once, you understand the Observer was adversarial to Lyndon because he was the enemy of the liberals. He used to call us the Red Hots. And he designated the Democratic National Committeeman from Texas, Ben Ramsey, a rot-gut, a right-wing lieutenant governor who was in total command of the U.S. Senate for the oil industry and every other industry that had any clout. So sure, yeah, I knew Valeni, but we didn't drink together.
I got to cut it.
You got it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Ronnie's going to be with us, so feel free to ask him more about that time period or people you know